Even silence becomes evidence when heaven files a case. It's important to remember that God is not whispering at this moment. Rather, he is pacing the courtroom of heaven with robes swinging, eyes blazing, and the gavel poised to fall, not on you, but on them. They believe that they could torment an innocent soul and then leave as if the universe didn't see. They believe that spiritual offenses carried no repercussions and that emotional killers were exonerated. However, the truth is that under ancient law, giving a false statement was punishable by more than just humiliation. It was the exact punishment they sought to inflict on the innocent. What happens then, when heaven decides it's time to balance the scales and dozens of people band together against a single chosen soul? Mass spiritual eviction, you guessed it. Heaven is acting divinely, not fairly. And let's face it, some of these people are going to discover the hard way that karma is God's legal assistant and not just a vibe. Also, if you've ever questioned whether God takes betrayal personally, particularly when it involves one of his own, fasten your seatbelt, because today we're revealing what happens when divine judgment ceases to be postponed and becomes imminent. Let's begin. #1. They lied to the divine about you, not just to you. God is enraged because of this. This was not your typical case of someone slandering someone else out of jealousy or spite. This was a petty gossip disguised as a spiritual attack. Unaware that the author himself was listening, they opened their mouths and completely rewrote your story in the hopes that no one would fact-check it. When you were quiet, obedient, and faithful, they attempted to paint you as guilty. To make matters worse, they believed they were convincing enough to fool heaven. Like daggers, they turned words into weapons. Rather than simply criticizing your actions, they asked you about your identity. They said, "This person is a problem," rather than, "This person hurt me." Additionally, there is a distinction between the two: identity assassination and human conflict. While grinning about it as if it were innocuous, these people denigrated your name, ridiculed your vocation, and branded your character in ways that dehumanized you. Because of this is now personal to God and transcends karma. Not only did they treat you disrespectfully, but they also disregarded God's choice of you. When someone disparages the reputation of a chosen person, they are opposing divine judgment rather than merely waging a smear campaign. Neither did you anoint yourself, nor did you appoint yourself. That was God's doing. And they entered dangerous territory the instant they started pursuing you as if you were just another stranger. In front of the one who sealed you, they were speaking against you, even though they believed they were speaking about you to others. It's similar to someone entering a courtroom, making up a story about an innocent person and thinking the judge isn't listening. They were unaware that lawyers are unnecessary in heaven. God is the judge, the verdict, and the witness. Furthermore, when falsehoods are spread about the defenseless, divine wrath doesn't demand an answer. Rather, it demands a ferocious one. Yes, you remain silent. You remain polite. You persevered. However, they failed to remember that God was recording while you were silent. Additionally, they are now using every untrue word they believe they had buried to further their own spiritual repercussions. This is divine correction, not merely payback, and it's already happening. #2. Instead of mistreating you, they ridiculed God's process of selection. This is unique because of that. This went deeper than simple jealousy, personal distaste, or miscommunication. They were upset because you were chosen and they were not because of your personality. It's not that you did anything wrong. Rather, they were unable to cope with the fact that you were a chosen one, which revealed their spiritual rejection. They were shocked that God would pick someone like you instead of them. They didn't think you fit the picture. They didn't think you were worthy because you weren't loud enough, polished enough, agreeable enough, or broken enough. They were hoping God would pick someone they could manipulate, praise, or put up with, but he picked you. Quiet, honest, perceptive, imperfect, but dependable. And their ego was affected by that. Therefore, they attempted to resist God's decision by tearing you apart instead of submitting to it. They pretended to have the power to disregard God's will. They believed that by disapproving of you, they could somehow stop you from calling. They genuinely thought that heaven might reconsider if enough people decided to despise you. People who believe they are more righteous than God develop delusional pride in this way. A genuine servant of God honors God's decisions, even when they are unclear, and the more they attack you, the more they demonstrated why they weren't selected. It was who you stood for, not what you said or did, that made you a spiritual threat. You served as evidence that God favors the invisible, the disregarded, and the misinterpreted. Their self-proclaimed importance, phony humility, and religious performances were all in stark contrast to you, and they retaliated rather than confessed their sins. However, it is too late to reverse the actions taken. Not only did they question your assignment, but they also questioned the person who gave it, and heaven takes that seriously. They insulted God's wisdom by their actions, making fun of the throne. Now he is responding, not with words, but with wrath. Because those who dare to tamper with divine order are not only exposed, but also corrected in public. #3. Because your innocence convinced them of their guilt, they desired blood rather than the truth. Blood was what they wanted, not the truth. That's why it was so risky. Your innocence was something they actively hated, not something they simply ignored. You were the threat because you didn't do anything wrong, not because you did something wrong. You were too disorganized, scandalous, or phony to be a part of their mess. They attempted to destroy you rather than leave you alone, and they did not do it in a quiet manner. They did it in unison, loudly, and with complete agreement, as though they had a right to bring you down. They were uneasy with your purity. Their demons were agitated by your tranquility. They couldn't stand it when you showed them how corrupt they had become by remaining kind, grounded, and unconcerned despite their cruelty. You didn't have to defend yourself or provide evidence. Everything they had been trying to conceal behind forced alliances, phony narratives, and fake smiles was revealed just by standing there with clean hands. Because their entire plot would fall apart if you remained grounded, they wanted you to fall and break. To justify the filth they were already engulfed in, they needed to see something soiled about you. However, nothing remained. They went crazy because you didn't give them what they wanted. They lied, exaggerated, and created drama where none existed, which is what broken people do. They used your trial to prove their guilt. Since they couldn't stand the fact that you walked in a level of favor they never earned, some of them weren't just out to get you. They were out to destroy you. They wanted to destroy your reputation, your influence, and your calling. It was spiritual rather than personal. In order to feel better about what is corrupt, someone who is spiritually out of alignment will always try to crucify what is pure. However, God witnessed every misspoken word, private conversation, and set trap. Now that you're innocent in the face of blatant hatred, he's reacting, not because you're flawless. When they searched for dirt, God discovered a pure soul. And now he is loudly calling for justice. #4. God sat quietly because he was gathering receipts, not because he was not there. They interpreted God's silence as consent. They interpreted his silence as an indication that he was unconcerned, or worse, that he concurred with them. However, they were unaware that God's silence is rarely due to inaction, but rather to the fact that he is documenting everything. Heaven was archiving everything that was said behind your back, including false smiles, insults, and lies. You weren't being ignored. You were being watched while being protected. God knew that the truth had to come to light on its own, so he refrained from intervening too soon. People would have doubted your strength and believed you were rescued rather than righteous if he had broken up the storm too soon. Now, though, there's no doubt, you not only made it through, you remained clean. And God was constructing a case in the spirit that none of them could see coming while they were busy laying traps, giggling, and waiting for your demise. Sometimes, divine judgment builds like a wave, silent, heavy, and impossible to escape once it strikes. Other times, it comes in like thunder. What they did was remembered by God. He was aware of how they handled you. He simply gave them time to change their ways because you deserved it, not because they did. Because even though they didn't deserve it, he showed them mercy as a way to honor the love you still had for some of them. However, that period is now over. It's legal correction from the highest authority, and it will be exact. It's not emotional retaliation. Because it is with receipts, not with confusion, that God moves after silence. There will be no omissions or exaggerations. Everyone will receive their share. And those who said, if God was real, he would have stopped me, are going to see what happens when God suddenly decides to intervene. You were being defended in slow motion. You weren't forgotten. The judge is now standing. The case is over. #5. They were on trial the entire time, even though they believed they were testing you. They genuinely thought they were putting your forbearance, fortitude, and moral fiber to the test. They prodded your wounds, tugged at your triggers, and waited for you to lose yourself, lash out, or break down. Heaven took notes, but they never understood that you were never the one being tested. They were. Your life, your response, your silence. All of it exposed them. God already knew you would survive, so He didn't let the persecution test your survival. It's what you were made for. The true intent was to disclose them, to demonstrate the extent of the darkness they were prepared to engage in, entertain, and speak about when they believed there would be no repercussions. You were like a mirror. They attempted to disguise their jealousy as concern, but you exposed it. The control they referred to as protection was revealed by you. They attempted to hide their resentment behind phony wisdom, but you exposed it. They had the option to leave. They had the option to check themselves. They had the option of being humble. However, they made the conscious decision to choose cruelty instead. They turned down every chance to be sympathetic. They took advantage of every weakness you displayed. They failed the exam by proving they'd rather be right than be righteous. And that's why God is stepping in, not because you couldn't take it, but because they couldn't be trusted with your presence. They thought this was a game. They didn't know it was an investigation. They assumed they were watching your response when all along God was watching theirs. How far would they go to tear you down? How far would they go to paint you as the problem? How much venom would they release in the name of truth? That's what heaven wanted to see. And now that it's been made clear, judgment is coming, not emotional backlash, but divine accountability. They weren't exposing you. They were revealing themselves, and the mask is off for good. What they thought was your breakdown was actually their breakdown under divine observation. And now they're the ones being sentenced, not because you asked for it, but because they earned it. #6. You were the lamb they slaughtered, but this time, God's not letting it be for their salvation. They treated you like a sacrifice, like the pain they dumped on you would somehow cleanse them. Like if they could just break you enough, humiliate you enough, isolate you enough, maybe they'd feel better about their own darkness. They projected their guilt onto your name and convinced themselves that what they were doing was justified. They weren't just cruel, they were calculated. They gathered together, shared their lies, and acted like handing you over to the fire was some kind of necessary cleansing. But there was no redemption in their motives. Only ego, only evil. They told people you deserved it. They twisted your silence into guilt, your strength into arrogance, your discernment into rebellion. They made you the scapegoat for everything they couldn't control, couldn't understand, or couldn't dominate. They didn't want healing, they wanted a target. So they picked the one who never fought dirty, the one who kept forgiving, the one who had every chance to clap back but didn't. You were innocent, and that's what made you dangerous to them. But this time, heaven is not letting it go. God's not turning this into a sermon about suffering for a greater good. This isn't about you carrying a cross so they can find grace. That door is closed. What they did wasn't holy, it was hostile. And now your pain isn't being used for their salvation. It's being used as evidence. What they did to you has become their spiritual bill, and heaven always collects. They thought they could use you up, drain your energy, attack your name, and walk away clean. But what they didn't count on was divine reversal. God is not ignoring what happened. He's not dressing it up in religious language. He's calling it what it was: unjust, evil, abusive, and fully accountable. There will be no peace for those who bought their comfort with your destruction. They didn't just mistreat you. They abused a soul God trusted them with. And now the very pain they tried to erase is the spotlight heaven is using to expose every hidden motive, every whispered betrayal, every silent spectator. Justice isn't coming. It's already arrived. #7. They built their reputation on breaking yours. Now heaven is reversing the currency. They didn't just damage your name. They used it. They turned your struggle into a storyline, your missteps into entertainment, and your healing journey into a punchline. The more they distorted your image, the more attention they got. The more they humiliated you, the more power they felt. They built their own status off your suffering, and they called it truth-telling, venting, or just being honest. But what they were really doing was harvesting influence from your downfall, and they never thought there'd be a cost. They gained sympathy, built alliances, and earned trust by turning people against you. They painted themselves as the victim, the hero, the wise one, all while dragging your name through the dirt behind closed doors. But here's what they didn't understand. God keeps receipts, and heaven doesn't just reward the innocent. It exposes the manipulators. Everything they gained through dishonor is now being reversed. They are beginning to lose the credibility they took by using your name. People are starting to awaken. Without you saying a word, the truth that was previously hidden beneath layers of deceit is now coming to the fore. By divine orchestration rather than retaliation or clapbacks, your name is being restored naturally. The microphone is being flipped by God. Once applauding your mockers, the same audience is now uneasy. The cheering has subsided. The fruit doesn't lie, so the story isn't working anymore. And those who attempted to destroy you are now suffering from rotten results. Their relationships are disintegrating. Their peace has vanished, and their favor is eroding because the foundation they established was false. You are not required to defend yourself. You don't need to elaborate. Your silence is a tactic, not a sign of weakness. Because God was preparing a divine reversal while they were performing. In the same places where they attempted to embarrass you are now the scene of their greatest shame. God is ensuring that everyone understands the distinction between genuine favor and borrowed fame. So that is not a coincidence. #8. Heaven was always waiting for the scales to tip. It was never neutral. You believed that God's silence was due to his inability to decide who was correct. However, there was never a query. Heaven was never neutral. God wasn't wandering around eternity, wondering if you deserved it or not. From the beginning, he witnessed every lie, every plot, and every instance where they stabbed you in the back while grinning in your face. His silence was a tactic, not a sign of hesitation. He was allowing them to display their entire hand. Not because he was perplexed, but because they were. He was allowing them to go as far as they dared. They believed they were winning. Heaven's patience was interpreted by them as approval. They believed they were safe because they were not hit by lightning while they were lying. However, they were unaware that divine timing functions differently than the human ego. God was allowing them to construct the very rope that they would use to hang their own credibility rather than jumping in to silence them. They revealed more the longer they spoke. Their trap got deeper the more they played tricks. The balance has now shifted. That was already decided. God was never comparing your value to theirs. He was gauging the amount of injustice he would tolerate before taking action, and the scale is now full. The gavel is about to fall. The verdict is wrath, not the emotional kind, but the divine kind, rather than confusion. The type of person who rearranges everything. The kind that exposes every lie used to elevate the wrong people and destroys phony power structures. This cannot be walked back. No rebranding. There is no "we've all made mistakes" rhetoric that can undo the past. The harm they inflicted on your soul, peace, and reputation is now returning to them in greater measure. And not because you desired it or demanded retribution, but rather because God waited and made justice indisputable during that time. Pleas are no longer required of you. Heaven has already decided on your side. And now they are going to be publicly, totally, and irrevocably judged by the same silence that once shielded them. #9. They were fighting the version of you that God was going to release, not you. Really, they weren't fighting you. In reality, they were afraid of the version of you they thought was on the horizon. The future you, the healed you, the anointed, exalted, unstoppable you that would cause every lie they told to fall apart in the face of your true self. They panicked rather than rejoiced when they caught a glimpse of your potential, because they would be exposed as the insecure, cunning cowards that they really are, not just as liars, if you became what God said you would be. They therefore moved quickly. Prior to the ascension, they attempted to kill you. Before your platform could rise, they attacked your name. They created tension, spread lies, and planted rumors in an attempt to undermine your credibility before others could witness your success. They were attempting to erase the future in addition to harming you. The part they didn't anticipate, though, is that God allowed them. God didn't stop them because he knew something they didn't, not because he agreed. He was aware that every effort to bury you would only serve to set the scene. Each lie would turn into fuel. Each betrayal would serve as evidence. And now that they have tried every plan, this is the time when God is raising you up. In public, honestly, and without apology. The solution is your ascent. It is the counterargument. It's the verdict. God created you, so he didn't clap back. You became the proof that not a single lie, plot, or betrayal that was intended to harm you succeeded. Your elevation now condemns them, not with retaliation, but with results, instead of merely honoring you. Because people will realize the truth, that the lies weren't strong enough because the favor was genuine, when they see you prosper after all the dirt that has been thrown in your name. And nothing makes your adversaries more frightened than seeing you become indisputable. 10. Their downfall was their confusion of your mercy with helplessness. They believed that you couldn't fight back, so you didn't. They thought you were weak when they saw your mercy. They assumed you were helpless, afraid, or insecure because they saw you remain silent, calm, and elegant. They never realized, however, that your silence was spiritual discipline rather than submission. The alignment was magnificent. The reason you spared them was because you were covered, not because they were untouchable. You had every opportunity to strike back. You had enough receipts to burn down the entire circus and enough truth to expose them. They could have been humiliated by you if you had equaled their energy. You did, however, do as your spirit told you to do. Don't. Stand still. This isn't your fight. Let God handle it. While heaven was recording all of your acts of restraint as righteousness, you watched them boast, laugh, and boast as if they had won something. Their conceit prevented them from seeing the reality. They believed they had gotten away with it because there were no immediate repercussions. Pride does just that. It makes people believe they are unbeatable and blinds them to God's patience. However, delay does not equate to denial, and mercy does not equate to approval. God's mercy is delaying judgment so that people have time to turn from their sins. However, they are unaware that they are slowly, smugly, and in front of others digging their own grave when they use that delay to intensify their evil. The wait is now over. Heaven isn't holding back anymore. The constraint that surrounded them has been removed, and what lies ahead is clarity rather than merely consequences. People will discover what was concealed. Those who shared their laughter will begin to doubt everything. They will no longer form alliances. When mercy ends, exposure begins, so their words will start to work against them. And the fall starts when exposure starts. They were simply being spared because of you. They weren't indestructible. However, their protection has ended since heaven made the case public. You only had to live through them. You never had to destroy them. And now their fate is sealed by their ability to survive. #11. God won't do nothing, they said, until they understood that his delay was a death sentence. They genuinely thought that God would do nothing. They made fun of your faith. Your tears made them laugh. They boldly uttered your name, believing their lies had silenced heaven. And they became comfortable and conceited, believing that God was either asleep or uninterested, when there was no lightning, no doors slamming, and you didn't come out swinging. They sealed their own sentence because they mistook divine delay for divine disinterest. They failed to realize that God never delays because he is unsure, but rather because he is stacking the weight. Instead, thunder waits, builds, and rumbles deep beneath the surface, stretching over time, waiting for the ideal moment to strike so that the entire land can hear it. Thunder doesn't explode the moment the sky darkens. It's the way judgment works. It appears to alter the atmosphere, not merely to frighten people. They believed they had circumvented the system. But God was acting. They kept saying, if God was real, he'd have done something by now. He was observing. He was filming. He was allowing them time to repair the harm, turn from their sins, and humble themselves. But rather than retreating, they advanced. They made more fun of it. They organized more people. They recruited, not just sinned. In his mercy, God continued to wait. However, the waiting was for your benefit, not theirs. Therefore, nobody could claim that you wished for this when the gavel finally fell. You didn't have to do anything, so nobody could hold you accountable. That thunder's echo is now approaching. All of their covert actions are now being exposed. Those who applauded their brutality are now retreating. They are now silent instead of laughing. Their assurance is giving way to bewilderment. This was not how they expected God to appear: quiet, slow, and decisive. This is retaliation, not negotiation. Heaven approved of it, not because you asked for it. They can't get away from the same God they believed was ignoring you. The very thing that allowed their judgment to grow was the delay that they mistook for safety. They're standing in the thunder they said would never come now that the storm has arrived. #12. In the courts of heaven, your silence was a legal tactic, not a sign of weakness. Your lack of response wasn't a loss. It wasn't a sign of weakness. Passivity wasn't it. It was strategy, in the courts of heaven, not the courts of public opinion. You maintained your composure despite their shouting over you, lies about you, and twisting of every word. Not because you had nothing to say, but because you were aware of who was observing. Most people overlook the fact that sometimes the loudest arguments are made in silence, but you understood that. Every time you opted for peace rather than retaliation, you were constructing a case, not on earth, but in the world beyond. The harm they inflicted upon you was not minor or innocuous. It was consistent, well thought out, and in certain instances, unimaginably cruel. But you remained clean rather than fighting dirty. You had the opportunity to clap back, but you chose to walk away. When they attempted to bury your name, you raised your head. You didn't swear, but you did cry. You didn't snap in public, but you broke in private. And you gave heaven more proof with each choice you made to maintain your integrity. In the spiritual world, self-control is a powerful virtue. Every injustice was captured in real time by your silence. All of your sighs, insomniac nights, and silent moments were recorded in a divine file bearing your name. Now that the file has arrived at heaven's courtroom, the judge is making a decision rather than engaging in debate. Your silence is now causing God to move for you. He's stepping in because your silence revealed who they are and demonstrated who you are, not because you yelled loud enough. Your silence was obedience, not emptiness. It was faith. It's your weapon now. Heaven used the same thing that they believed disqualified you for divine intervention. They believed you had lost. They believed you were finished. Heaven, however, saw something they did not: a spirit strong enough to trust God through pain, and a soul that refused to stoop. Your vindication is now legally justified and not just on the horizon. Heaven is protecting you legally in addition to emotionally. The case has been examined. The decision is final, and it will soon reverberate loud enough to drown out all of their lies. ##13. God is rewriting history with your name in gold after they attempted to write you out. They believed they had the last say on your tale. They believed that you would blend in with the background if they changed events, removed your name from conversations, and made up enough plausible lies. Their goal was to make you a minor character in a story they dominated. Thus, they covered up your truth with rumors. Your name was removed from the rooms you assisted in building. They muttered enough poison to change people's minds. And it appeared to work for a time. People became icy. The doors shut. They questioned your character. Don't be there. But here's the plot twist they didn't anticipate. Heaven doesn't need their consent to change the story's plot because God has editorial rights to it. They are recovering, not just recovering, but redeeming every chapter they attempted to destroy. Your name is being crowned, not just cleared, because when God restores, He does more than simply mend what was damaged. He raises it up in front of the same people who attempted to destroy it. You see, this is divine editing, not just vindication. God is rewriting the entire history, not just a few pages. And justice is dipped in the pen. Honor is infused into the ink. They are now elevating you because of the same moments they attempted to erase. The same name that they attempted to discredit is now prominently displayed in gold, both permanently and publicly. The best part is that heaven won't ask your enemies for permission. They are not eligible to vote. They are not allowed to edit. Your life is a miracle that God is writing, and they have no right to add footnotes or disclaimers. Now, all they can do is watch as God elevates the name they vowed never to rise again. Your story was interrupted, but it's not over yet. However, God is picking up where He left off, and this next chapter is being written with honor, glory, and unquestionable power. Your name will soon be inscribed in rooms that those who attempted to shut you out will never be able to enter again. That's what happens when heaven publishes the truth, not retaliation. #14. God is demanding that they publicly validate you, even though they attempted to do so. They believed they could treat you as though you were unimportant and then quietly go on. Their boldness discredited you, but now they want to make peace in secret. They wanted to whisper apologies in corners, but whispered lies in crowds. However, that is not acceptable to God. Not now. Not after all that they had done. They failed to realize that repentance is about making it right, not just feeling bad. They ruined your reputation in addition to hurting your feelings. In situations where you weren't even there to defend yourself, they damaged your reputation. Furthermore, God is now demanding public restitution rather than a private apology. The same people who treated you disrespectfully will have to put in the same effort to correct the record. They boldly ridiculed you. Now they must boldly honor you. Since spiritual justice is about divine balance rather than humiliation, they will have to point those same people back to you and say, "We were wrong." They persuaded others to despise you. Public correction is required for actions taken in public. Heaven does not do half healing, and any less would be incomplete repentance. This is a spiritual transaction that goes beyond vindication. Restitution is what it is. You must return, with interest, the respect, opportunity, and reputation that were taken from you. Your name is not a game to God. He witnessed your humiliation. He saw you remain silent, motionless, and polite as they pulled you along. The gavel has now fallen. Heaven is demanding public validation, not a private apology. And when God has to do it for them, they will be given the option to either restore what they took from your image or face the ensuing judgment. However, you will be honored in some way, loudly, visibly, and forcefully, because heaven restores honor, not just reputations. Furthermore, when God intervenes, He creates your name rather than merely defending it. Let them speak. Allow them to fabricate tales, alter chronologies, and act as though they were innocent, because there is a judge who never missed a moment of it in the end. Furthermore, heaven's courtroom is no longer in recess. The gavel has hit. Fire has been used to write the verdict, and every lie they attempted to tell you is going to be overshadowed by the truth, your truth. Not only were you attacked, but your light made you a target. You were sacrificed so that their shadows wouldn't appear so gloomy, not just rejected. What they didn't anticipate, though, is that you were marked for divine demonstration rather than destruction. They believed you would die from the agony. They believed that you would be defined by their manipulation. However, they only made you indisputable. The next chapter of your story is being rewritten by God using the very ashes they attempted to bury you in. It is being written in bold, gold letters. This is about reversal, not just justice. Not so you can shout, "I told you so," but so you can walk in unquestionable proof. It's about God turning the very stage they attempted to use against you into your platform.